Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Leverage Redemption. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So at the heart of this episode, Sophie has another person from her past. What was his name? Ben or something like that. Pops up. He found out about her because it's like, oh yeah, like an associate, which they're immediately like, oh, they immediately think it's Arthur. We find out later on that it might have been someone else, but it could have just been Arthur pointed them in the right direction. But nevertheless, it turns out the lady we saw at the beginning of the episode who was getting scammed, her name's Miranda, that's actually his daughter, and he's trying to help her out because she finds herself in the middle of an MLM. And I'm so used to not hearing them called by that name, because that's what the full name is. I mean, I guess that's a more technical term, and I guess the more slang term would be pyramid scheme, but multi-level marketing scheme is kind of like I think the more, like I said, almost clinical term, where it's like pyramid scheme is a more word that, like I said, slang or whatever. Either way, so she's caught up in a pyramid scheme, and she's draining all her money. And we found out at the beginning she's pregnant. So it's this whole thing of like, right, you're putting in all this money to buy product, and you're trying to sell it, but they're making you buy more. And the only way you're actually going to make potentially a profit is by bringing more people in. So you are a victim, bringing in more victims. It's very like, I mean, obviously, like the pyramid scheme mentality is also used in cults as well. So obviously, Sophie takes this job on because the guy's like, well, you kind of owe it to me because I went to prison for you. So it's like more people, just like Arthur, trying to guilt her into stuff because it's like, right, our past, you didn't do things the way you're supposed to. I do love that this entire episode, the rest of the team is part of this magic baby scheme, whereas whereas Elliot's spending time with this guy trying to learn as much as possible about Sophie's past, because she talked about it in the episode Arthur showed up, but she didn't go into details about everything. There's still some missing pieces to the puzzle, but this is actually heartbreaking job, because you see, like, once again, it's just like that's like the fact that someone's his scam, like no remorse can scam so many people out of money and dig them deeper, because there's the whole rebirth of it all. It's like, oh, what's rebirth? Oh, rebirth is when you're working your way up the pyramid, and then like, oh, I think it's time for you to be cleansed and have a rebirth, and you're gonna feel so much better. Oh, what's rebirth? You start at the bottom again. I'm like, they're not only are they draining you initially, they double dip by taking you to the bottom and forcing you to work your way back up. I'm like, that's horrendous. That is like super disgusting. You're just like, man, they come across some scummy people, but like, man, that's some next level scumminess. Like, oh, like we already drained you everything. And even that line of, oh, there's always more pie, kind of implying like, hey, you could always sell more to people. You can find more people to sell stuff to, which is applicable, but it's almost like, oh, you always have more to give. It feels like that. Not even just talking to the people that they're trying to sell to or they bring into this scheme, but just like the victims themselves, like, oh, you have more to give. You've already drained all your bank accounts giving us money. Well, there's still more. There's still more pie for you to give. Like it's disgusting, and you're just like, Jesus. And Miranda just being, especially when she found out like she was going through a rebirth, she's like, no, I've already kind of given everything. It's like, see, you're letting those negative thoughts in. It's just like, oh, dude, that sucks. And what makes this so interesting is that regardless of it all, Deborah's actually really good at what she does. And even Sophie was like, wow, we are all gonna have to step our game, because she's really good. She didn't get to where she is right now in this business, like, because like her husband is kind of running the schemes and stuff, but she's kind of the main brains of the operation. She's like an evil Sophie to some extent. But I thought was so interesting is like, cause Sophie's like, oh, like, say like the 5 blah, 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 blahs. And Sophie was like, don't worry about it. Cause like Brianna was trying to help her out. And Sophie was like, why don't we say more? And she's like, the first one is, they said it, and then she adds more to it. The second one is, adds more to it. And then Deborah's like, no. How about you say the rest of it? I was like, oh, Sophie almost had it. I was like, that was so smooth what she did. But then she ends up saying 3, 4, and 5 easily. It's like, wait, how'd you know that? It's like, because like they're the basic tenets of any self-help book. So it's not like this is some grand advice. It's like you can find this advice anywhere, and it's just like, yeah, it's just the basic of basics, because why get overcomplicated? Why not just use the basics as the fundamentals that draw people in? So And to help sell everything. I love that Parker, and I love that she gets attached to like the baby belly. I even love that she's like, oh, when baby little Alec comes on the way, when the little Alec is on the way, which I was like, that's so adorable. I mean, it's like, of course that's the name she chose. I find it so fascinating because like I don't like, rarely does anyone ever call Hardison by his first name. You know. I think Parker has like on a few occasions, but even she mainly calls him Hardison. So I just think that's so, but I think that's just so sweet. Like a little Alec on the way, it made me giddy thinking, oh, that's super sweet. So that's what she's enjoying that whole aspect, and it's like, hey, like the cool thing about the belly is I can like keep stuff in there. At the same time, you have Harry like getting cozy with the husband, which is, he's played by Christopher Gorham, and I was like, what have I seen you in more recently? I was like, oh right, the Lincoln Lawyer series on Netflix. Either way, but I love that it's kind of like, yeah, we got to do a brocom, and it's like, wait, what? It's like, oh, it's like a rom-com, but like between dudes and stuff, and it's like a whole scheme of like, basically Harry has to like get really close to this guy and kind of create like a bromance, which initially like Elliot thought he was going to be the guy for the job, but it's like, no, you're too intimidating. And I guess he ended up giving Harry one of his cars for it, and it's like, okay, you can't go above 55 miles per hour. And it's like, oh, like you only drive this thing like 55 miles. He's like, no, I don't. You can only drive it 55 miles per hour. It's like, also, I always love when Elliot gets defensive, because also like when he was like, oh, the magic baby thing that sells baby clothes, and the guy Ben and Sophie were looking at him. He's like, I had an ex. I just, don't judge me. Like, leave me alone. Like, I don't need to explain myself to you. That's always one of his go-to explanation. It's like, oh, it's always, it's a very distinctive so-and-so. Or I had an ex who, whatever, you know, it's like, don't judge me. I don't need to explain myself. But the problem with, and also, Brianna is stuck in a desk job, which I guess as like a hacker, that is kind of hell for her. And like her boss, or at least one of her superiors, is Ronald. And I love that she's like, oh yeah, it's almost like a pyramid, huh? He's like, yeah, I never thought about that. And throughout the episode, he keeps coming back. So, you know, when you said that pyramid thing, like it really, yeah, because like the only way you make money is when you bring other people in. And it's like, really? Like a pyramid scheme? He's like, no. Ronald starts having a breakdown, dude, and he's walking by the magic baby sign, and he's seeing the pyramid, and he's almost like, no, it's like, and just Brianna's like, poor Ronald. She legitimately felt bad for him, and he's just like, wait, is this actually a pyramid scheme? And she's like, well, what is your dream? He's like, nah, it's too embarrassed. She's like, go ahead. He's like, no, I don't want to. I actually want to be a trumpet player. He's like, I'm not too bad. It's like, yeah, I want to be a trumpet guy. I want to be a jazzman. And it's like, oh, you go live your dreams, because is this what you really want? And he actually points Brianna. It's like, oh, so if you want to go after Deborah and Richard's computer, you can always do this. Ha ha ha. And he leaves. And I love later on, he's like, yo, I didn't actually go on a lunch break. I went home to get my trumpet. No pyramid schemes in jazz. I love it. I was like, you go on, Ronald. You do your thing. And I do love at the ending, we do see him kind of playing. And it's like, wow, he's actually really good. I'm like, yeah. And he's happy. He's living his dream. And I'm like, good on you, Ronald. And you got out of a pyramid scheme. That's good. I mean, like, sadly, you know, and the same thing's applicable to cults. I mean, they can go hand in hand. So yeah, like, not everyone is fortunate enough to be out of a situation like that. So I even love Parker dropped some information, which the fact that they included it in the episode like that probably means there is truth to it. She's like, yeah, like most people, like 99% of people who join a pyramid scheme, an MLM, don't end up making any money. In fact, they end up losing everything. And it's like, she's like, yeah, there's only like the 1% that actually makes money. And Miranda was like, right, like, really? She's like, yeah, you can Google that. Like, the fact that they included that specific line of dialogue is like, oh yeah, like, it's so well known and documented information. And it's like, statistically, only 1% of people in an MLM will actually make any money. The other 99% is just a losing game. You're just going to be further and further and further in debt. So it's kind of like, yeah, like, you are a loser, but that's because this was a lose. Like, she kind of said in a very like like tactless way, but it's also like, it's her being very blunt, because it's like, yeah, that's what an MLM end is. It's a loser's game. Like, you're signing up to be a loser. Like, there is no winning in this. You can be that 0.001% that can, but like, no. Like, more often than not, you're going to be on the losing end of that. Like, everyone is. That's kind of that's the whole purpose. That's the predatory nature of them, I think it's such an interesting parallel between like Sophie's experience with Deborah and Harry's experience with Richard, because it's like, hey, just guys being guys, bros type of thing. Like, oh man, this is amazing. And I do love that Harry's wearing the mustache with it too. And I even love like Parker giving him advice about like what part of the stage of like the 4-act structure he's supposed to be at. It's like, oh yeah, this is almost like the seduction phase or something like that, like the sexy compliment phase or whatever. Bow chicka wow wow. I love that, dude. Also love that he's got all that medieval stuff, and him and Harry kind of duke it out. And then Harry's earpiece fell out, and they went to fight. And it's like, yeah, he's like, oh, I hope you're a better fighter than you're a liar. And he's like, well, I've been trained by the both on both fronts. I'm like, yeah, I do love that. It's like, I mean, obviously he's picking up things from everyone on the squad. He's very much like Hardison in that way too, because Hardison kind of like, I mean, that's why Hardison decided like, oh, I want to do my own job, because he started picking up a little bit from Nate, Parker, Sophie, and Elliot. He started picking up a little bit from each one of them, so like Harry's kind of in that very similar regard. But I love that the guy Richard threw an axe at him. He's like, really? You did not just do that? I'm like, yeah. Later on, I'd add in an attempted murder charge on top of that. Everything else that they're guilty of. But like I said, they were kind of having fun up to that point, whereas Deborah kept really, really pushing Sophie, and Sophie kind of opens up about the Nate situation, and like, right, yeah, he was the smartest person, he had the plans, but he was always kind of, his blind spot was always himself and his issues. That were always where the bumps came, when he just couldn't turn, he could view out, but he could never look back at himself. And she's like, yeah, but everything got better the moment we got together, all the plans we came up with, and then he had to die, like, and all our plans just died with him. And so for her, it's like, we had a family, and it's my responsibility to take care of them. She's like, maybe I can't really, I'm not good enough on my own without him, but they are my responsibility, and I've got to do right by them. And you hear Parker, Brianna, and Harry hear that, and that's why she always pushes herself so hard, because it's like, right, you guys are my family, and I have to do whatever it takes to look after you. Because I think it is like, right, like losing Nate probably like really struck a chord with her, where it's like, no, like, you never know, well, you got to make sure you're there for your family, because she lost Nate, and now it's like, right, she's kind of putting all of that energy towards taking care of them, because they also took care of her after Nate left, and despite like her kind of pushing them away to some extent. And I think that was something they needed to hear. We don't know if Elliot heard it. Probably he might not have had his comms in, so we don't think he heard that side of the conversation. But then also we got a little insight into, once again, the parallels, well, in conjunction with like the further conversations between Deborah and Sophie, and then everything with Elliot and that guy, where he tells the judge, he's like, hey, I got caught because I have a very distinct characteristic nose. They eventually found out the crown was a fake, and they went and investigate, and they found out about our theft of the original. And then he talks about how me getting caught, I was a getaway driver, like I was going to take the fall regardless. But Arthur, it seemed like him and Sophie were close, and he thinks Sophie like sacrificed him, because it's like, hey, she was with the Duke and everything, and everything was wonderful and nice. And she wasn't willing to give that up. But for Elliot, it's like, that doesn't sound like Elliot, the Sophie I know. And he's like, yeah, because she's a liar. You kind of get so wrapped up in her, knowing her for so long, you think like, oh, you know her so well. You forget that, yes, she's a top-class con woman, a perpetual liar. That's kind of her thing as a grifter. Lying to even those closest to her. But that goes in conjunction, because immediately I was like, wait, didn't she open up about the fact is the reason why she betrayed Arthur is because she fell in love with the Duke that they were scheming, and she didn't want to hurt him, so she, that's why she didn't help out Arthur. Because it's like, yeah, Arthur went away, but it's like Sophie, being who she is, could have whispered in someone's ear to ease things up, make it easier for him, but she never did. And well, ultimately, she ends up talking about the person she let down. And the one she was talking about, I was like, is she actually talking about Arthur? Because it doesn't sound like that. But she had talked about like leaving someone behind. She had the choice to leave or stay, and she left. And she's like, what really guts her is, for so much of my life, I didn't give it much thought. It's like, hey, whatever, I found a way to move on with my life. I buried that person deep within myself and just kind of lived my life, and just kind of, because I lived my life in a way where the past was the past and I just left it there. But, now it's the situation. She's feeling guilty about the fact is, for so long, I didn't look back, and now I am having to look back. And you're wondering, like, is that about Arthur? Until Deborah at the end was saying, like, that person you left behind, it was a daughter, wasn't it? And you're like, oh, is that why she didn't want to betray the Duke? Because maybe she was pregnant at the time, and she had the baby, and then had to give the baby up, or left it with the Duke and bounce. So you're like, man, maybe that's what this has all been about. Because it feels like a parallel you can make with, I guess, both characters of, like, in his Dark Materials, like, both, a little bit of Azriel, but probably more so Marissa, Miss Coulter. So probably a little bit more on that front. Interesting timing too, just because of his Dark Materials ending and everything. Which at the time of recording, I still need to watch the series finale. I've only watched the penultimate episode. I haven't seen the series finale yet. But yes, there's an interesting parallel in that front. So you're like, so is that what this has all been about? But what I also thought was interesting too is when the job was underway and Parker found that safe, and there was like stuff like, oh yeah, this Uzbekian land or whatever, and you're like, wait, wasn't that guy online not online, the guy Elliot walked in on, like, wasn't he talking like Uzbek? And it's like, turns out, yeah, I was like, wait, what's going on here? Turns out, like, he brought this job to Sophie because it's like, hey, my daughter actually was in trouble, but two birds, one stone. My boss was like, hey, you should, because this was over a land deal, that land that they were going to buy, rather than it being a magic, baby, like, run, like rather than like a place for that, another place, because they had a few offices here and there, instead of making it a business place, it could be like a runway, I guess, almost like a plane runway or something. And at first you're like, is it Arthur? But he's like, she's like, no, Ramsey. Which I can only assume, and she's like, you're still working for him after all this time. I'm assuming Ramsey's the guy that she worked with, the one that led to the whole, like, Arthur situation going down all those years ago. I think that was the boss that was like, yo, sell out the Duke or whatever. Or wasn't he the one that suggested that she protect her cover and sell out Arthur instead, I believe. And even Elliot's like, who's Ramsey? And she's like, the person I had hoped thought I was dead. So now it's like, this person from my past, no, I was almost hoping they thought I was dead, or at least treated me like I was dead, but now they know I'm alive. They set this whole thing up. They're actually the ones that kind of suggest. Ramsey's the one that put Ben up to it to go to Sophie for this. It's interesting because it reminds me of little season 3 and a little season 4 of the original series, where the team kind of got used to take down specific bad guys. Like the main person in season 4, the bad guy in season 4, was taking advantage of the bad people they were taking down for the purposes of making themselves richer. It kind of felt like that. Whereas in season 3, they were everything they were doing was pushed towards taking down Damian Monroe. So it's more so like 4 than it is season 3, but I think that's so interesting, and it seems like that's going to be a very interesting final shot of the episode too, when the camera tilts up and it shows like that like gargoyle, like that demon or whatever, and you're like, oh, that feels very, very symbolic on what that could mean. But this was kind of nice, kind of getting this touch of like Sophie's past. So we got a little bit here and there, and it feels so befitting that Sophie would, because she's the biggest enigma on the team. Because, I mean, as a grifter, you've had so many identities, you've had so many lives. that even the team's not aware of all of them. I mean, this team does know her real name. I don't think we, over the course of the series, ever found out. Nate eventually figured out what her real name was. But yeah. I wonder, does anyone that, like, maybe that also separates them too? It's like they know her real name. Because they always go like, oh, what's she going by these days? Sophie? I mean, maybe some of these crews like Arthur and that Ben dude and even Ramsey, maybe they do know her real name, and maybe that's pretty significant too. Like, oh, you thought the Leverage team were the only ones who knew her real name? I don't know, or maybe they just only know her by her aliases as well. But because I think I mentioned this in a previous one. Speaking of Damian Monroe, it's very much like that whole thing of like the Arthur Wilde thing coming up, being like, yeah, everyone on the team has had their demons and their secrets. Once again, Elliot's biggest thing being, well, I mean, obviously things with him and his dad this season, but also like the Damian Monroe thing was a pretty big thing because he had hidden that from the team. Like everyone's past kind of comes back to haunt them to some extent. So it seems like Sophie's just kind of in the hot seat now. I mean, Nate had his in season 1. But that was also because that was always potentially going to be, the end result was always going to be coming after the guy that denied the insurance company and everything that was connected to his son's death. So, not paying for the treatment that would have saved his life. But circling away from that and just talking about, like, the fact is, Deborah and Richard taking the fall. Obviously going down and their entire empire going down. Everyone getting refunds, but not just refunds, also getting a little extra bump. Like Miranda being able to kind of get some help to kind of, bounce back after everything. So that was a nice, and all's well that ends well type of situation. But like I said, the stuff with Sophie is getting more intense. And I think as we're progressing to near the end of the season, there's only like 4 episodes left. Yeah, 4 episodes left in the season, so I'm curious, like, how I could definitely see, like, this being like a 2-parter season finale type of situation, just like last season was. The actual season finale, not like the season finale I thought was episode 8, which was just the mid-season finale, because I didn't know at the time season 1 was split like that. Tension and all that aside. More often than not, they typically do have, like, Leverage has always typically had 2-part season finales regardless. But anyway, I'm very interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. I could definitely see going forward Elliot kind of pushing Sophie more and more to kind of talk about the past, and maybe one of those 2-parters or maybe a future an episode beforehand will kind of go into that past a little bit. I could definitely see Arthur like Wilde popping up again. Now, whether it's in the company of Ramsey or that's just kind of a separate thing, we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good